what? We're going back to Texas today. You might be wondering, why are we talking about so many candidates that are running in Texas? And it's because that is a state that, believe it or not, is right on the cusp of having a major blue wave. A number of House seats and the Senate seat are in play in Texas, and so are a lot of the state legislative seats this cycle. It's an important investment to make, and there is no candidate that can convey that more clearly than Shri Kulkarni, who is running for Congress in Texas's 22nd district. This is a district that some might say leans slightly Republican, but the interesting thing about the race this year in November is that the incumbent is not running. So it's technically an open seat where nobody has an incumbency advantage. And Shri Kulkarni ran one of the most interesting races in this district for this seat in 2018 and came awfully close. Voters know him, and he's running a really interesting campaign in a district that is actually a majority minority district that has a huge amount of diversity, voters who are African American, Hispanic, and Asian American. And Shri and his campaign team understand that. That's why they are campaigning in multiple languages, doing what it takes to work through relational organizing and community organizations and networks to reach all of these voters in different communities. And it's part of the reason why I really believe he's going to be successful in November. But here's the thing, to get there, he's going to need every single vote. Every vote is going to count to get Shri over the finish line successfully. And it's where the effort and energy that you and I are able to put into his race is going to make a big difference in determining whether or not he can actually win and we can flip this seat blue. It matters that we show up to volunteer. His team could really use our help in phone banking and reaching out to likely voters around Texas's 22nd district. It matters that we chip in and contribute what we can. I'm particularly proud to make an investment in Shri's race because if he wins, he will be the first Indian American and Asian American elected to represent Texas in its congressional district. And it matters that we tell our friends that he's running in this amazing race in this incredibly diverse district that is about to turn blue in Texas. So let's go and talk to Shri and learn more about this race. And I hope you'll join me in backing this amazing new generation candidate.
In a fairly low-income neighborhood in Houston. Growing up, I experienced things like gun violence, having to bus across town, and losing my dad to cancer when I was age 19. So being the oldest of 4 kids, I had to work my way through college and eventually join the Foreign Service. So I served our country overseas for 14 years, including in war zones like Iraq. But in 2017, I just decided that the current administration, after everything I'd seen between calling to ban all Muslims, between bragging about sexually assaulting women, saying that Latinos could not be our judges, the last straw for me was the Charlottesville Nazi rally in 2017. I decided that all of my red lines had been crossed, and I could not in good conscience serve in a government that didn't represent me, and I don't think represents any of us. So I resigned from the Foreign Service to come back home and run for Congress because I think we deserve a government that represents all of us and which we all have a voice in, and that's what we've been doing for the last 2 years.
That's amazing. In fact, something that I think is really impressive about you is you speak a huge number of languages, right? Are you putting that to work on the campaign trail?
So not quite as many as Mayor Pete, but I do speak 6 languages. I speak English, Spanish, Hindi, Chinese, Russian, and Hebrew. And we've used quite a few of them, but our volunteers actually speak many more, as do the people in our district. This is the fastest growing district in the entire country. We speak over 100 languages here, but most of those immigrant communities had never been reached out to before. Among the Asian community, 72% of them had never gotten a message from a Republican or a Democrat. So we ran the first campaign of its kind in the country. We are now actively campaigning in 21 different languages. So literally—
That's incredible. In fact, I'm actually hoping, I'd love for you to share more about TX-22 with the folks that are listening, because you've just hit on something that I think makes this district really incredible. It's what in campaign speak we might call a majority minority district, and has a tremendous amount of diversity. And I know that's something you and your team have really been factoring into your campaign plans. Could you share more about what you're up to and what the district is like?
Sure. So, growing up here, there were some stereotypes about what Texas is. We think of cowboys and we think of barbecue and boots, and all of those things are absolutely true even today. But there's a lot of other things that Texas is today in 2020. We are the largest Muslim state in the country. The third largest language spoken in Texas is Vietnamese, and we have incredible diversity across our state, and in particular this district. Texas 22 is what the future of America will look like. We have about a 14% African American population, 20% Asian, 25% Latino. Like I said, we speak over 100 languages. We have every faith that you can possibly think of, and I go and visit all of their houses of worship when we're not under a pandemic on a regular basis. But the problem is that most of these immigrant groups were not being spoken to. They're definitely not being listened to. So our campaign is focused on bringing all of those groups, marginalized groups that are not traditionally considered to be part of the electorate, into the process. We've always said that the answer when immigrants are being demonized is not to get mad at other people, but to bring more immigrants into the political process. With women's rights are being threatened, which they are, especially in Texas right now. The answer is not to get mad at men, but to get more women involved in the political process. And if young people, students, are being terrorized in their schools like they are in places like Santa Fe, right outside of my district, the answer is not to get mad at gun owners, but to get more students involved in the political process. And that's what we've been doing. Our district is extremely diverse. It's highly educated. Over 50% of us are college educated here. It is the face of Texas in the 21st century. And if we can bring all those people into the political process, we can make a change, not just for Texas, but for the entire country.
That's amazing. And what does that mean in terms of the type of campaign that you and your team are running?
Sure. So one of the things that we focused on last year was relational organizing. So what we mean by that is that traditionally, when you call people, you're calling a random list of voters, or you're knocking on doors randomly. But what we found is that the connections, the networks that we have, especially within immigrant communities, but it's true across any community, those relationships are the most important thing that we have. And so we started mapping out who knows each other. So, for example, we made lists of Gujaratis in our district, and we had Gujarati volunteers calling them and then marking the ones that they know from their friends and family members. Or Ismaili Muslims, for example, which is a very tightly knit group. Among our Nigerian community, we have an Igbo group and a Yoruba group. Latin Americans, we have, Colombians and Salvadorians and Venezuelans. We have Mexican Americans who've been here for 5 years and speak English as a second language. And we have Mexican Americans who've been here more than 500 years. And if you sent them a text message in Spanish, they might think you're crazy. So we have a wide variety of groups here. And during the election last year, on every single day of early voting, our volunteers were getting email with their friends, their family members, their neighbors who had voted and who hadn't voted. And that way we were actually able to dramatically transform this district from a place that was safe Republican to one of the most competitive districts in the country, and get a 6-term sitting Republican incumbent to drop out of the race and make this an open seat. I mean, that's how you transform a district like this.
And so this is huge, right? It's something that I think is so powerful about your campaign in this moment. You've got a candidate, you're really familiar with the district. You've taken a pass at getting to know voters in the district once before, which puts you in an even stronger position this time. And the seat is open. There's nobody that's got an incumbency advantage. And it's a district where getting out and connecting with voters everywhere in the unique way that you and your team are able to, meeting folks where they are on language and working through their trusted networks, really, really powerful and frankly clever campaign tactics. It's part of the reason why I think this is a really important campaign to invest in. I have a feeling you might agree with that too.
No, absolutely. And I'll say this, this isn't just about winning one campaign. It's about changing the way that we do politics. I mean, I myself had not been involved in politics in my entire career. I served under the Bush administration and under the Obama administration. But what I've seen is that people don't have that same kind of trust in our institutions. There's a lack of trust in our media, in our courts, and definitely in the White House. And we need to repair that trust. And the best way to do that, I think, is to make sure that everyone feels that they have a voice. So it's not just about getting people to show up in November. It's about strengthening these networks so that if people know that they have a voice in Washington, these communities on civic education boards that we have in areas like healthcare, like education, like the environment, they can bring up local problems and local solutions to us so that we can advocate for that after the election when I'm in Washington. And by the same token, when we successfully make changes like on gun violence, for example, where we got the first funding for gun violence research in over 20 years, we can bring those messages back to the community and make sure that we continue to address their needs. And I think that's what's going to transform the way that we do representative democracy in the 21st century.
And Shri, as you're out there connecting with voters in this district, what are the issues and the topics that you find are most important to them? And how are you building that into your message and the work that your campaign is doing?
Sure. So obviously the number one issue and what Democrats have been talking about for years is healthcare, like by far. In my family, when I was 18, my dad got cancer and I had to drop out of college to come home and take care of him, do his IVs, his physical therapy, take him back and forth to the hospital. And unfortunately, when he passed away when I was 19, my family was on the point of bankruptcy. That's still a very common story across the country right now. But that's true for people across the political spectrum. A few months ago, I was in the hospital and my nurse was a Republican and I asked him what was his top issue. And he said healthcare, because he had a surgery the past year that cost over $100,000. And then I asked him, what was your copay? He said, I honestly couldn't tell you because I haven't been able to pay it off in the last year. And I work in a hospital. And now that problem has been highlighted by the pandemic. You see millions of people now losing not only their jobs, but their health insurance at the same time. So that was the number one issue. It's what we've been talking about. And I think the entire country realizes the importance of dealing with this problem, not putting it to the side.
Totally. So speaking of healthcare and the pandemic, I mean, we're obviously living through this unprecedented global public health challenge. It's about to come to a head in your own neck of the woods because Texas is opening up again this weekend. And you're running for elected office to serve your neighbors as a leader. I'm curious, sort of your take on what you think elected officials ought to be, what type of leadership they ought to be providing at this particular moment.
Sure. So I'll say one thing first, that the thing that I hear the most that people are tired of is extreme partisanship. Right. And so everything now is filtered through a partisan lens. So, for example, our county judge, who was a classmate of mine in grad school, she's an immigrant, the first immigrant in Harris County. We have an immigrant now as county judge in Fort Bend County, again, the face of Texas today. But the county judge in Harris County, she issued an order.
That's Lena Hidalgo, right? She's awesome.
Yes, Lena Hidalgo, my old classmate. She is awesome. But she, in the interest of public safety, she issued an order for everyone to wear masks out in public as we try to balance the harm being done by the quarantine with the threat of a resurgence in cases of COVID-19. It's for our own safety, because everybody who goes out, obviously, when you wear a mask, you protect others. It's not about protecting yourself, it's about protecting others. But some people started attacking her. In fact, there's a lawsuit against her by the Republican Party saying that this is unconstitutional. Meanwhile, the governor, he issued an order saying that any business that opens up can only operate at 25% capacity. And those same people who were attacking Lena are okay with the governor's order. In both cases, they're trying to do this in the interest of public safety. And so I think what people are looking for is leaders who base their policies on evidence, on facts, on common sense. And with the opening up of Texas, they had a series of guidelines. The fear that I have about reopening on Friday is that one of the guidelines issued by the governor's office himself was that we had to decrease in cases for 14 days, and that hasn't happened yet. So any leader who's out there needs to be able to put their ideology to the side and rely on facts, rely on evidence, rely on experts. And if the facts are inconvenient, we can't just push them to the side. We have to deal in the world of reality. And I think that's the kind of leader people are looking for.
Yep, I would underscore that, co-sign that. Shri, could we talk for a minute about what the general election is shaping up to look like for your race in Texas 22? I know there's a runoff on the Republican side. It's looking likely that you're going to face off against either a small business owner or your sheriff. Tell me how you and your team are thinking about the general election. What happens to your message? What happens to your campaign turnout operation, especially now with the pandemic and the way that it's sort of affected the way that everybody is able to campaign?
Sure. So I would say this race in particular is a perfect example of the difference between old Texas and new Texas. So our sheriff here, he made a big deal about a woman who was arrested for having an anti-Trump bumper sticker, or was targeted for having an anti-Trump bumper sticker a few years ago. The businesswoman that you mentioned, the self-funding Republican donor who moved into our district, she said recently that COVID-19 is going to save more lives than it's going to kill, because we're going to shut down Planned Parenthoods and reduce abortions across the state of Texas. So that is this extreme version, this stereotype of what Texas had been in the past. On our side, we're going to emphasize that, you know, Texas is modern. Like I said, we pull people in across the political spectrum. In the primary, it was very interesting. The Republicans spent more money on this district than on any district in Texas by a large margin, and the fifth most in the entire country. Yet still, the total number of people coming out on the Republican side dropped by 10,000 votes. You know what we did on our side? We increased it by 35,000 Democratic votes, more than double what it had been before. And good news is that some of these people are new voters, and then others, about 15% of them, they used to be Republican voters voting in the Republican primary, come over to our side. So a district that had been one of the safest Republican districts in the country has gone from being, you know, 25 points for Mitt Romney to 0.6 points for Ted Cruz. And then on top of that, we've registered another 40,000 voters since that happened. So this is where some of the most dramatic change in the country is happening. And if we continue to re-emphasize that in the general, that people here don't want that extremist version of politics. Everything on the other side is the top issue is defending the president no matter what. We don't believe in a monarchy here in this country. We don't believe in just supporting an individual person. We believe in actually coming together across the political aisle. And a lot of the people in this district, they're rejecting that kind of extremist ideology, and they're looking for people who have more common sense, practical solutions. If we keep emphasizing that, this is going to be the hallmark for the entire country, I believe.
It's a theme that I'm hearing echoed as we're having these conversations with other candidates like you that are running in really even other parts of the country, but there's a strong emphasis on a message around getting things done and everyday issues that matter for Americans in their day-to-day lives. I think that's really powerful. And my hope is that come November, we're going to have another great group of you going off to Congress ready to roll up your sleeves and get some work done for your constituents.
No, go ahead.
No, please.
Absolutely. In fact, I'll tell you, way even before I ran for Congress, after the 2016 election, when things were so tense and so divided, we were trying to find out how to work together, how to even sit down at the same table. I got together with a Republican colleague, and we formed a group called Breaking Bread. The whole idea was that we don't need to keep debating each other over issues and lining up in different camps, putting tribal badges on each other. We would sit down for a meal once a week, about 10 of us, and we would try to literally put ourselves in the other person's shoes, where one person would talk about a concern they have, and another person would try to restate their concern in other words until they say, yeah, you got me. You actually know where I'm coming from. And then the whole group would try to address the first person's concern without violating the second person's values. It's a kind of exercise that I think we need to be doing across the country. And I have seen actually more of these happening, but we especially need it in Washington. We need people who are willing to sit down and say, you know what, whether this solution comes from my ideology or not, let's try to sit down at the table and get things done. Our country wasn't founded by a bunch of people who agreed on everything. People disagreed very strongly. What they agreed on was that we live in a country together, and I care about your interests and you care about my interests, and the rest of the issues that we can negotiate at a table like adults.
Man, I can't wait until I'm reading about you having these Breaking Bread dinners in Washington. So we got to do everything we can to help make that happen. You know, something that I would be remiss if I didn't bring up, just given the fact that it's you and I talking, is, you know, in this campaign, if you emerge victorious, you'll actually be the first Asian American and the first Indian American elected to represent Texas in Congress. I'm hoping that we can go for a twofer, because we're also really rooting for Dr. Gandhi down in Texas's 10th congressional. But Could you share with me sort of what that means to you, or sort of, have you thought about that and what that means?
Sure. And so I'll also mention that I will be the first person of color ever elected in this district, even though it's a 60% person of color district. And
That's massive.
that's what our district looks like. That's what our state looks like. But unfortunately, in the Republican Party, that's not what their party looks like. It doesn't represent the diversity of our state or our district. And so for me, people ask me, well, should I vote for you just because you're Asian American or just because you're Indian American? I said, absolutely not. You vote for the most qualified candidate, but anytime that there's a first of something, especially with a community like ours, like the Asian American community, which has grown so rapidly, we contribute our intellectual capital, we contribute our financial capital, but so far we've not had a seat at the table. It's striking that the second largest state in the country has never elected anybody from the Asian American community. So I think anytime there's a first, the first woman, the first Latino, the first LGBT, the first Asian American ever in the history of Texas, I think that's something to be proud of, because what that means is that this community, the Asian American community, which any immigrant group, like my father, when he came here in the 60s, the first thing you do, you keep your head down, you try to start your business or your practice, and you try to assimilate. But we're at the point now where we deserve to not only assimilate, we deserve to actually have a voice. We deserve to be represented. We deserve to have a seat at the table. And that's what this represents to me.
Makes sense. One last question for you about the campaign, if you'll humor me. Could you get into a little bit more of the details of what your really innovative team is doing to help you guys get out there and share your message with new audiences in this virtual campaign reality during the pandemic? What types of tactics are you using?
Sure. So people have asked me, how can you campaign during a pandemic? And what I tell them is, if campaigning means knocking on doors, having fundraisers in people's houses, having face-to-face rallies, of course we can't do any of that. But if a campaign means actually meeting people where they are, stepping up to solve problems, giving people a voice and showing leadership, absolutely we can do that. And I'll tell you some of the ways that we've been doing that. One of the biggest issues right now is information or misinformation. Unfortunately, some of it being spread by people at the highest levels, even from the White House, which is extremely dangerous during a pandemic situation. So our ability to get out good information is extremely important. We've had more town halls than ever. On the virus itself, with pulmonologists and epidemiologists, on mental
health. You're hosting virtual town halls with health experts?
Absolutely. Oh, wow. Absolutely. In fact, we're doing a town hall pretty much every week now, and sometimes more than one in a week. We did one on small businesses with someone from the Small Business Administration. We're doing another one this week because the PPP program ran out. We did one on gun violence because that actually still is an issue, even in a pandemic. There was a mass shooting in Nova Scotia recently, and the issue of kids who are in houses with weapons, if they're not properly stored and locked up, or people who are in homes with someone with who's a domestic violence and abuser, those are extremely important. So we did one on that. The census is extremely critical this year because all of those services, where we plan our schools, our roads, how we redistrict for the next 10 years, that's all impacted by the census. So all of these are important. At the same time, we're encouraging people to go out and whatever way we can to provide community service. So we did a blood drive, a food drive. We're actually trying to turn our office into a location for the food bank here to make sure that people who need to get access to the food bank. We have enough food, but we don't have enough locations to process the number of people who need to access it. They have that extra access point. We did a drive for gloves and masks and personal protective equipment. But the biggest thing that we have been able to offer that no one else has is that campaigning that we were doing in 21 languages. We are now able to do wellness checks, actually call people within the community. Wow. Senior citizens, people who are alone, but especially immigrants who are from these different communities who desperately need to feel that sense. There's so much isolation right now, and you need to feel that there is a community still around you. And so that's been a tremendous benefit to people in our neighborhood. So those are the kind of things that we're doing in our campaign. And honestly, anybody out there who would like to help us participate in it, it really doesn't matter where you are right now. Even in the last campaign, we had people helping us make phone calls in Spanish and Vietnamese and Chinese and Hindi and Urdu and Arabic from all over the country. But now literally you could be anywhere, whether you're 2 miles away or 2,000 miles away. People can actually help us on the campaign, and so it's actually an opportunity if you look for it in the middle of a crisis.
That's true. The one thing about the fact that we're all engaging virtually is that it sort of levels the geographic divisions on this work. So that's actually a perfect next question. Matt and I feel like your race is one of the most important ones to be investing in. That's why we're going all in and contributing as much as we can and telling our friends to do the same, including the friends that are watching this video. But how can folks get involved to help your campaign? Where do they go? What do they do? In what ways can they be helpful?
Yeah, sure. So, like I said earlier, the power of this campaign came from bringing new voices to the table. So people who are not necessarily engaged before. So, like I said, when immigrants are being demonized, get more immigrants involved. So if you know people who are within the immigrant community who haven't been as politically involved, we'd love to get them involved with the campaign. The same thing, women. Don't demonize men, get more women involved. Last year, we campaigned specifically to women who had never voted before. We got almost 5,000 women to vote for the very first time in their lives in our district. And the same thing, students, young people, after the March for Our Lives movement started, we got them involved. So if you have students, people within your household or within your friend network who want to get involved, we have internships available for them. But anybody who wants to get involved, we need as many resources as possible right now, because clearly you can see, like I said, they spent the most money on this race out of any race in Texas. They've already reserved money for the fall. So we did a lot last year. In 2018, we were completely grassroots. We weren't on anyone's national radar. We started from one person in January and built over 1,500 volunteers by the time we got to November, and almost beat a 6-term sitting incumbent without any of those national resources. If we have the resources right now, like I said, we can not only transform this district, but we can literally be a bellwether for the entire country. This is the only place in the country where we've had a sitting congressman and 2 state reps within our district who've all stepped down in the last year. And that's because of this transformation that's happening right now. So it's not just our district, it's about redistricting 39 seats in Congress. It's about contributing the most number of votes. We are the fastest growing district in the country and the largest by population. We're bigger than 5 states. The only districts that are bigger are the state of Delaware and the state of Montana. So if you want to help contribute to flipping a district, to redistricting these 39 seats, and contributing to the statewide race in Texas, then you can go to our website at www.shri2020.com and get more involved with the campaign.
That's awesome. And it sounds like folks can volunteer their time to help on the relational organizing side. They can chip in money, or, the thing that I always say is you do a big service to a candidate like you if I tell 10 of my friends about you and about your race and ask them to pay attention to it. So those are all ways that you guys can help, and Shri could really use it because he's incredibly qualified. He's a terrific candidate, and more importantly, he's running the kind of campaign that we need, where you guys are getting out there and engaging with people in a really important community building way, in a way that where the process of campaigning is yielding a lot of value itself. So thanks for what you're doing, Shri, and thank you to your amazing team.
No, I just want to say thank you, Swati, as well, because this kind of mobilization, it doesn't come from one person. It comes from all of us pulling our networks together. I mean, if we really believe that this is the most important election of our lifetimes, then it's not just about us. It's about all those other people that we convinced to come into it. So I really appreciate you doing that with your networks and making sure that everybody realizes how critically important this is. So thank you so much.
Totally. Awesome. Okay. Catch you later. Thanks, Shri.
Thanks, Swati.
Thanks for